This is the second year doing this. Wasn't sure how well it would go over last year, but it seemed to do well, so I figured why the hell not again. In case you don't know who H.P. Lovecraft is, this presentation starts with a bit of an explanation about him and how he influenced various things. So if everyone's ready, let's get started. Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in Providence, Rhode Island on August 20th, 1890. He died there as well, March 15, 1937, of intestinal cancer. He was actually sickly most of his life. He had a bizarre childhood and a bizarre family. His mother would go back and forth between coddling him and treating him like trash. So you can kind of see how that affects somebody and makes them kind of warped in their writing style. He was an antiquarian in his writing style, represented that. He used a lot of words and spellings that were not common for his time period. He liked cats a lot, which a lot of writers do, but unlike most writers, he had a cat with a very interesting name that I will not say aloud because one of you will probably jump me when I leave the room. He wasn't the most forward-thinking person because of his sheltered childhood and his very WASP-type environment. He was rather xenophobic. Some people like to kind of play it down, but he really was racist. He really was.
Honestly, you couldn't figure it out from the...
He did speak well of Japan. He actually, it's probably the only Asian country he spoke well of, but... He had a very descriptive writing style. He focused on creating atmosphere, describing places. I'm sorry, I'm a bit tired right now. His description of his creatures and so forth were often very limited. He felt that it's what you don't see that is really chilling, is when you have something displayed in full glory, you can put it in a box, you can understand it, you can limit it. When you cannot conceptualize something, it's far more disturbing. Despite all of his negative qualities, he is probably, with the exception of Edgar Allan Poe, the most influential horror author in history. He influenced Stephen King, Junji Ito, Neil Gaiman, John Carpenter, Guillermo del Toro, so on and so forth. Though it's not the subject of this panel, you could easily do something like this for American properties, and it could go on 5 hours. That's how influential he really was to a lot of these people. Common themes and motifs. He wrote mainly what they call the weird fiction. It was kind of a precursor to what we think of as horror and science fiction now. It was any kind of stories that were out of the ordinary. One of his most famous quotes is, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." He often wrote stories that dealt with forbidden knowledge, secrets that humanity was not meant to know. Discovery of this knowledge usually caused insanity. It's very rare that the protagonist of one of Lovecraft's stories comes out of things unscathed. Usually they are dead or completely insane. Genetic determinism and familial doom. One cannot escape the fate that their ancestry has for them. That if your ancestors were wicked and evil, there's a good chance that no matter what you want, you are going to end up that way as well. And if your ancestors were not entirely human, you probably are not entirely human either. Pre-human civilizations. He pioneered very much, in a lot of ways, what they now call the ancient astronaut theory. Though his was a little different. Rather than humanoid-type aliens, they were tentacled, hideous monstrosities and other creepy, crawly things. Most of these creatures and entities either have left the planet, or hidden, or are all dead. But they existed before humanity, and one of his ideas of fear of that is humans are very anthropocentric. We don't like the prospect that there's something out there bigger than us, and that tends to chill a lot of people. The gods in his works are actually simply aliens or interdimensional beings that are so beyond us that humans see them as gods and have been worshipped. his gods vary from Cthulhu, which is the creature that everybody knows. A lot of people only know about Cthulhu, but Cthulhu is actually one of his lesser creatures. Cthulhu really isn't that strong. There are things so far beyond it, such as Yog-Sothoth, which is, in certain stories, it's described almost as the personification, or the physical form of time. Cosmicism. Lovecraft's outlook on the cosmos in his stories, and to an extent in his actual life, was that the universe is at best indifferent to humanity. The gods that do exist are at best immoral. They don't care. Some are flat out evil, such as Nyarlathotep, who is a god who has shown up in a lot of Japanese properties. He himself is actually rather malevolent. We have no protectors. There's no God looking out for us. There's, no heaven, no anything. We're grains of sand on a cosmic beach, and the people treading on the beach really don't care if they kick us aside. Cthulhu Mythos, that's the name given to Lovecraft's continuity of horror stories by August Derleth, who was one of his groupies, if you will. Pretty much all of Lovecraft's stories, maybe except his satire and humor stories, are set in this Cthulhu mythos. Lovecraft actually did not ever use that term. He called it Yog-Sothothery, which Cthulhu mythos is probably a little easier to say, maybe. Civilized men. A lot of his stories feature protagonists who are always men, obviously, because of how backward thinking he was in the time period, who are scholars or scientists, and they tend to be the ones who have to confront some kind of unknown, some kind of forbidden knowledge, or things that challenge their assumption of what reality is and what humanity's place is in the cosmos. A lot of them end up really, as I said before, insane or dead. Occasionally, do you find an individual in a story who's delved into the stuff and been corrupted by it, now is some kind of evil would-be sorcerer or mad scientist. On the other hand, he often portrayed primitive men. These were your, backwoods hillbillies and non-Western individuals. Again, he was kind of racist. They're usually these primitive people are the ones worshiping these evil gods and so forth, but occasionally they have insight that the civilized people don't, as they can actually say, don't fuck with that, which the civilized people don't listen to. He has another corpus of works that actually is tied in with the Cthulhu mythos. It's usually called the Dream Cycle. It was inspired by Edward Plunkett, the 18th Baron of Dunsany, who's also known as Lord Dunsany. He was a minor British noble who wrote poetry and mythology stories, and Lovecraft was heavily influenced by him, and so he used... Is this microphone being crappy? Because it sounds like it's a bit weird to me. Okay. These stories had a very dreamlike atmosphere. They were set in exotic locales, cities of gold and bizarre jungles and forests. The moon, which loss of paradise. Often a protagonist of one of these stories will be searching for something that they left behind or something they had in a dream, but they're never able to find it. They just spend their lives searching and searching. Occasionally somebody finds it, but usually at the cost of their life in the waking world. The dreamlands are basically based on an ancient forgotten earth that's preserved within the unconscious of humanity, if you will. Those who are skilled can go there while they sleep. There's a lot of strange creatures in these dreamlands, which, if you're going to make a world of dreams, you probably should populate it with all kinds of amazing things. Ghouls, ghouls are creatures who eat corpses in graveyards. Night Gaunts, which are these winged, leathery creatures. Zoogs, these furry little monsters. They're the moon beasts, which are these toad-like creatures that live on the moon. And then the cats of Althar. There's a city called Althar where it's forbidden to kill a cat. The cats in this city are able to jump through space and go to the moon. I was kind of iffy on addressing this. There's what was called the Lovecraft Circle. It was a circle of writers who corresponded with Lovecraft, and they contributed to his mythos. And the reason I felt they should be included is a lot of their characters and ideas have become so entwined with Lovecraft's own that anything that heavily references him will reference their stuff. So I'm going to try and go through this quickly, though. Clark Ashton Smith, he's probably the most well-known of, or probably the second most well-known of Lovecraft's friends and contributors. He was a poet in California. He dabbled in weird fiction, but not to the level Lovecraft did. He was a little more traditional fantasy and science fiction. He contributed a variety of things like Avonway, which is a French forest in an alternate medieval period that has satyrs and gorgons and all kinds of beasts and such. The Hyperborean cycle, which takes place at a landmass called Hyperborea that's in the north near the Arctic before the Ice Age, covered it. Sathaogu, that came out funky. Sathaogu, sorry. It's a giant toad-like god that's shown up in a lot of Lovecraftian-based things. Eban, which is a sorcerer who created a book called the Book of Eban that had information about these ancient gods. Robert E. Howard, he's probably best known for creating Conan the Barbarian, which arguably is in the same continuity as Lovecraft's works, because these authors shared things, and there are Call the Conqueror stories that make reference to Lovecraft's creatures and so on and so forth. He really pioneered the sword and sorcery genre. At the age of 30, his mother had gone into a level of coma where the doctor said she will never awaken. So Howard went out to the car, took out a revolver, and shot himself in the head. He really obviously had mother issues. It's a lot of some of his notable contributions. Nameless Cults, which is a book that the author traveled the world and infiltrated all these dark cults and wrote down about them. Lovecraft mentioned it several times. The Black Stone, which is a giant stone monolith that was worshipped by various primitive tribes. And the Serpent Men, they're a race of snake men who worship Yig, who was one of Lovecraft's creations. And then again, anything from Conan the Barbarian, you really can't kind of mesh with it, as ridiculous as that might sound. Robert Bloch, he's actually best known as the author of the book Psycho, that Alfred Hitchcock adapted to his film. He was a friend of Lovecraft's and actually wrote several stories within Lovecraft's mythos. The Vermis Mysterious, or Mysteries of the Worm, is a grimoire, or books of magic and forbidden knowledge he created that Lovecraft mentioned several times. Creatures that were referred to as star vampires. They're aliens who feed off blood. When they first come around, they're invisible, but as they drink more and more blood, they start to become more tangible. Then Beatus, who was a chimeric god who was brought to Earth by the Deep Ones, an aquatic race that Lovecraft created. Frank Belknap Long. There he is. There's actually a photo of Lovecraft with another person. He's best known probably for his sci-fi stuff. Some of his stories were turned into forgettable movies like The Last Minzy, if you've ever heard of that. It was a children's sci-fi film, or The Twonky, about a talking TV. He also wrote a lot of comic books, like superhero comic books, but his probably most famous creation are the Hans of Tindalos. They're these creatures that move through the angles of space and time. They're never really described. Hound is what they're called, but we don't know what they really look like. Shaunerfong, which was a elephant-like creature. It was actually found as what they thought was a statue until it started coming alive and eating people in the museum. Doles, which are these brain-eating worm creatures. Yeah, this was the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, so you had a lot of brain-eating things. August Derleth, he is the one who coined Cthulhu mythos. He was a historian and archivist. He produced quite a bit of work. The problem with Derleth is some of his suggestions, some of his ideas, and some of his codifying the mythos. He did start Arkham House with another author named Henry Kuttner, and Arkham House is a publishing company that was started to keep Lovecraft's works in print and available. Lovecraft, while he was alive, was virtually unknown. Very few people had any idea who he was. He published stories in pulp magazines like Weird Tales and Amazing Stories, and those had relatively small subscriber bases. So it is Derleth who we have to thank for Lovecraft's work being as preserved it is. Unfortunately, Derleth had a Christian background, and so as he wrote stories and connected things and built, he created what were called the Elder Gods. Basically, he pushed aside Lovecraft's concept that the universe was indifferent, if not malevolent, and created this race of good gods who would protect things against these great old ones and so forth, which there are many people who absolutely hate August Derleth because they see him as basically neutering everything Lovecraft wrote. Okay, Lovecraft in Japan.
Woo!
His work actually first appeared in the 1940s in Japan, which was not that long after he actually died. A magazine called Hakaba, or Graveyard, was where some of the stories were first published. I looked everywhere, and I could not find a single image of this magazine. Unfortunately, I don't know that many of them still exist, because from what I understand, they were printed on very cheap, shitty paper, and that was in the 1940s. In 1986, Cassium's Call of Cthulhu role-playing game got brought to Japan. Hobby Japan published it, and after they dropped it, the company Enterbrain picked it up. And they started producing original content for it, like, as you can see right there, there's a Call of Cthulhu manga tie-in. It became, you went from having, these stuffy antiquarian scientists fighting, tentacle monsters to having schoolgirls being harassed by tentacle monsters. Ken Matsu, he is the author who helped spread, probably the author who did the most to spread Lovecraft's works in Japan, and he also wrote many stories himself, such as this Cthulhu Kingdom anthology, which Five Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos by Japanese novelists. Okay, now this book, this series you can get domestically, Jashin Densetu, The Challenger of the Great Old Ones. It's about a organization that tries to defend Earth against these alien entities and creatures and so forth. Unfortunately, whoever did the translation job on this obviously was not a native English speaker, so it's very English. I don't know how legible any of that is, but if you're in the front row, at least you could probably see. I arrested you. Well, in this section, we find out the main character, the schoolboy, who's been used by this Lamia woman who's killed his girlfriend and such. Well, unexpectedly, he turns into Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. So your protagonist turns out to be Lovecraft's most evil god. And as you can see, he decapitates his would-be tormentor. And for some reason, there are booms rather than slashes. He's also ripping her limbs off, you may notice. Now, this is probably the series that most people will think of when they think of Lovecraft in Japan, and it's something that probably would have made Lovecraft rich. Nyaruko-san, if you're not familiar with it, is basically this girl comes to Earth and to protect this teenage boy, and she throws herself at him. The thing is this girl, she's cute and all, but that's not what she really normally looks like. Or at least that's what she says. Tell me, you know, if you like these cute anime girls, would you still like her in one of those forms? You're a braver man than I am.
Kawaii!
An interesting cosplay for sure.
So Nyaruko is again Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, which she frequently threatens to show her actual form. Kuko is based on Kafuga, who is a August Derleth character who is like a fire entity. Hastur, that is actually a boy. He's rather feminine. He's actually also has a thing for the main character. So there's some yaoi going on in here that interests you. Or would be yaoi. He's named after Hastur, who is actually a complicated character. Hastur was created by Ambrose Bierce, who was a author and journalist of a variety of styles in the late 1800s. Hastur is a shepherd god. He was then taken by Robert Chambers in his story, The King in Yellow. The King in Yellow, parts of it deal with a mention of a play that if it is performed will drive people mad. The show, True Detective, actually borrowed aspects from The King in Yellow. They used terms like Carcosa and so forth, which is the place from where The King in Yellow is supposed to be. Mahiro Yazaki, he's the main character. As it's Lovecraftian, you have all kinds of creatures like ghouls and nightgowns. You have Louis de Stone, who's basically Cthulhu. You can see her little apron.
And she's got a plate of takoyaki there, which are tentacle octopus fried.
Shantakun, this is a shantak bird. It's a type of bird from the dream cycle. It's Nyaruko is for pet. It can become giant like it is in the stories, but it gets its ass kicked really easily. So it ends up reverting back into this cute little thing.
Yes.
In this series, the cosmos thinks of Earth as the place for the best entertainment, specifically Japan. Manga, anime, adult games, to the point where the rest of the universe actually has to place tariffs and limit things because the media from Earth is like a drug. There's actually a black market for erotic games. They are traveling, and as you can see, there are a variety of creatures, and Nyaruko is waving to Amigo. So there's all kinds of little Lovecraft references. There's explicit Lovecraft references in here. It actually, in this show, it's acknowledged that H.P. Lovecraft was a writer and he created these characters, but no, he didn't create them. They're real, and most of them are cute. Cthulhu's Second City is now is now a corporation, and there's a video game publisher there. I mentioned before Clark Ashton Smith. Well, this character is named Clark Ashton Smith. Yeah, I wouldn't eat anything octopus related either that somebody associated with Cthulhu handed me. I think that would be kind of a bad idea. I don't know who will get this, but the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game has something called sanity points. The idea is as you're dealing with these unspeakable horrors, it starts to wear away at your mental fortitude. The game, it was not uncommon when people would play that game, the game would end after 2 days because everyone was dead or insane. So, because the game is popular in Japan, they figured, oh, let's make a reference to it. The funny thing about this is the cover is filthier than anything inside.
Yep.
I was unable to find many scans of this, so I actually to hell with it, bought a really cheap one, and I was shocked at the fact that the cover was more risque than anything inside. I'm sure there's somebody who felt it was bait and switch.
I did.
The book is mostly Lovecraft's and Clark Ashton Smith and Robert E. Howard and so on and so forth's characters reimagined as cute girls, be it the beings like Cthulhu and Azathoth or like the various races. Here's Cthulhu. Notice, she's got cell phones in her tentacles. Call of Cthulhu. She's calling her cultists from under the city. Here's a creature called a Shoggoth. If you look, the bottom left is a conception of what the creature looked like in Lovecraft's story at the Mountains of Madness. And at the right is the cute, Shoggoth. Who's in the story, the Shoggoths were a genetically engineered race made by these elder things, this ancient race that existed millions of years ago on Earth, as servants. So I guess they felt they were pretty clever having a cute girl who's a Shoggoth be running errands for her masters. She's got a list and a basket. I don't really know why the guys in the background are looking mad or in a very angry way, though.
They're probably crazy. They probably just saw the cover and thought something completely different.
They might have. Deus Machina Demonbane. This was originally a visual novel that was turned into a manga and an anime. The premise pretty much is that a young man ends up finding this girl who turns out to be the human form of the Necronomicon, or Al-Azif, the ultimate grimoire in Lovecraft's Mythos. And it's also naughty. So yes, he gets to fuck the Necronomicon. It also has giant robots. This is Demonbane, the Deus Machina Demonbane, the title. It's the grimoire's mech, basically. So this evil ancient book has a mech that it pilots with another individual. Al-Azif, she's the Necronomicon, she was the one getting felt up on the other page. Dr. West, this is this ridiculous villain who plays a guitar and sings. He's based on Herbert West, who is the main character of the short story Herbert West Reanimator, which was adapted to a movie called Reanimator with Jeffrey Combs, which is almost nothing like the story. Who's, again, Nyaruko-san. That's an individual they like to adapt. Ethereldia, she is another grimoire. She is the personification of what are called the Narcotic Manuscripts. She is the villain's grimoire because, the main character and the villain both have to have a lowly girl as their tone. Here's a deep one, though it doesn't really look like the deep ones that Lovecraft described. There's all manner of Lovecraft references, creatures, and so on and so forth. The game is admittedly an homage, completely. Now we're going to get into a few prominent individuals in Japan who were influenced by Lovecraft and either referenced his works or simply created their own with him in mind. Junji Ito is probably the most well-known that I'll talk about. He is a mangaka. He's been writing for many years. He cited a variety of influences, both Japanese and Western. Lovecraft has been a huge one. Common themes of his work are hideous creatures, body horror, which is always a fun topic, human powerlessness and despair, insanity, and the futility of escaping one's fate. So he's very Lovecraftian in that vein. He also likes cats, but I don't think he names them things like Lovecraft did. This is probably one of his most well-known works. Mm-hmm. It deals with a experiment that had been abandoned by the Japanese during World War II in the ocean that created these machines, these self-replicating machines that would attach themselves to decaying organisms as a power source. It's really gross.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very possible. These things end up overrunning Japan, And there's a motherfucking shark there. Eventually, though, as the fish decay too much, the machines start moving to other things, like humans. Pretty fucked up, huh? The thing that drifted ashore. This is a very short story that's rather Lovecraftian. Basically, this big, hideous thing washes ashore, and scientists and onlookers, gather around it as people do, until they discover that inside there are humans. These humans are slightly different looking, and it turns out they've been feeding off this creature like parasites. They end up cutting the thing open, and they all spill out. Pretty cool, huh? Hellstar Remina. This is one of the more unique stories that Ito wrote. A scientist stargazing discovers a planet. Once after he discovers it, he starts to notice it's coming closer because it has noticed it was looked at. That's what it looks like. As it's coming through the solar system, it starts eating the planets one after the other. It sucks up the gas giants like it's drinking soup. That's what it actually looks like on the planet itself. The scientist's daughter is Remina. He named the star after her. And a cult builds up that decides, oh, it's her fault, so we're going to sacrifice her to get it to go away. Some people try and escape onto the planet itself, and that doesn't go too well. Melting of tentacles. Here's it eating Earth. Pretty much everyone dies at the end. It eats the whole planet.
Woo, happy ending.
Uzumaki. This is probably Ito's other most well-known work. It was turned into a live-action movie, which was okay, but the budget meant the special effects were very limited and so-so, and it kind of pulled a lot of the from it. A rural Japanese town becomes obsessed with spirals, and it starts to change people and other things. Turns out that it pertains to an ancient curse. Here's an individual who eventually shoved himself into this wash basin as a spiral. His wife and son find him, and one boy starts turning into a snail. As you do. Because everyone says that someday I'm going to be a snail.